Hi everybody, it's Tahir here from Odeberg Permaculture Farm, and we are going to take a deep dive into the permaculture principles in this module. I feel that understanding the principles of permaculture is probably the most important aspect of permaculture, because the application of all 12 permaculture principles in design is critical if we wish to design and establish self-regulating ecosystemic human living environments. And understanding the different aspects of the principles and how they all work together to form one system is vital. So what we're going to do is we will run this module in two parts, because this is such an important aspect of understanding permaculture. We're going to go into a lot of detail about each principle. We're going to define it, and we're going to look at how it's applied in design and what it results in, and how they all integrate into one system. Okay, so let's get stuck in and enjoy. Okay, welcome to the presentation on permaculture principles. So permaculture principles, they form the next layer in the permaculture concept out from ethics. All right. So ethics form the core of the permaculture concept, along with the concept of ecosystemicism. All right. So this ecosystemicism then expresses itself into the 12 permaculture principles, which we discussed in brief in the previous presentation. So what we're going to do now is to look at each one in a lot of detail, and there's a lot of information, so we're going to do this in two presentations. We're going to look at the first few principles, which are more abstract and foundational in this one, and then we're going to go on to the more tangible and more expressive principles, if you want to put them that way, where it's easier to actually see them in action. Okay, but it's important to remember that there's no hierarchy here. Each principle is as important as the others. All right, so when designing, it's critical that all 12 principles are applied, because if you do not do that, you're going to have a leak, an energy leak in your system, and it's not going to self-regulate properly. All right, and so if you apply all 12 principles correctly using the design process, you will reach the holy grail of permaculture, which is self-regulation. Okay, the design and implementation of ecosystemic human life support systems that by their very nature self-regulate, all right, or provide for their needs from within themselves. And so what I've done is I've basically arranged the principles in what I believe to be an organic sequence. And it's not in terms of importance, it's just in terms of how the one set of principles feeds into and builds the next set. Okay, so this is how we're going to approach this. So with that in mind, the first principle is observe and interact. And each one of these principles has a little saying or an adage that goes with it that just provides a different angle on the principle and helps understand the principle in more depth. And this one is beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Okay, so we are the beholders. And permaculture is an information-rich system. Okay, and so this principle is all about awareness, being aware of what is happening to us in the present moment, being aware of our surrounds in the present moment. Okay, because that is what is going to be required if we're going to build knowledge of our context. And because we're dealing with human and natural systems, we're dealing with subject matter that's technically infinite and can be extremely complicated and confusing. And so to avoid this, we use a range of tools and processes to help us understand what's happening, okay, both on the human and on the landscape level, okay, both past and present and into the future, all right, because if we have this knowledge, we can design effectively. So observation is the primary tool in permaculture design, all right, because permaculture design is built on information. Right? It's based on contextual awareness and understanding. And so this requires us to take a scientific approach. And when I mean scientific, I mean an approach that is free of dogma, free of imposition. It's an approach that's completely open. And so what you're doing is you're actually, by using the processes, we are turning ourselves into a sponge that will just absorb information, all right? And it will absorb information in a specific way that enables us to structure it so that that information then is useful in design. So permaculture is a very scientific approach. There are creative elements to it and there's a lot of imagination involved, but the foundation of permaculture design is scientific, because we are in the real world and we are trying to develop systems that will self-regulate in the real world. And so it's not like landscaping where we would have an opinion how something would look and we'd go about establishing that. Permaculture is the opposite. Permaculture is all about becoming aware of potential possibilities and limitations so that we can apply our particular vision into the landscape context, okay? And in order to do this effectively, we need to use a range of different scientific approaches, some of them borrowed from other disciplines and some of them unique to permaculture. But permaculture is pure science, okay? And permaculture just extends the concept of science beyond the mainstream view of that. And we had a look at that earlier on in the presentation on the permaculture context. So I think you've got an idea of what I'm driving at here. Okay, but we need to become aware of what is happening. And so therefore we need to observe as objectively as possible. So permaculture design really at the end of the day is an emergence of pattern. Okay, it's an emergence, like these flowers emerging from the mud, the cracks in the mud. Okay, it's not an imposition of a pattern, it is the realization that there are patterns that are appropriate to the pattern of place and context. Okay, so what we do is we build a system of knowledge and information, and we become aware of our context, and out of that, all right, a design emerges by virtue of applying process, not opinion, okay? And so what we are doing really is we are harmonizing a pattern that is a result of good observation and interaction into the pattern of place that we are in. And we become aware of what that pattern is through observe and interact. And so on an environmental level, we observe our climate, our soils, our landscape, our plants, our animals, our existing infrastructures. On a human level, we would observe our culture. We would observe the trends in politics. We would observe the shifts in the marketplace, and we would observe the needs of the people who are in the design, and so on. Okay, and these processes that we use are generally expressed in map form, all right, because map form is the most effective way of representing spatial reality. Okay, so spatial reality is the arrangement of things in the landscape, and that's what permaculture design is focusing on, the effective integration of elements in the landscape so that they may synergize into a syntropic pattern. And so the most effective way of doing that is via mapping. Okay, so that's one very important tool we use in observation. We capture data in map form, but it's not the only one. All right. And so this tool of observe and interact is something we apply all the time. It's not just utilized in the design of our systems. Okay, it is a principle that we apply constantly so that we can keep our systems evolving and in tune with the reality that we are in the present moment. So we are constantly taking feedback from our systems and our surrounds and from the people involved in our lives, and we are adjusting our designs and our systems and our approaches and our strategies accordingly, all based on observe and interact. It's a continuous process. So permaculture is ultimately an observation-based system, and Bill Mollison stated that 80% of permaculture design is observation and research-based, and the other 20% is application. Okay, because permaculture design is an information and self-education rich system. We do not act unless we know what we are doing, because if we do not know what we are doing, we can cause harm and loss. All right, and that goes against the ethics of ethics of permaculture. And here you can see in this image that there's a sector map, which is a type of map-based observation process that gathers data about all the different things that are affecting the site of your design. All right, and it then informs us where we place things in the design. And so we have all these amazing tools that are inherent to this process of observe and interact that enable us to make good design and management decisions. The next principle is design from patterns to detail. And the adage is can't see the wood for the trees. And this has got to do with the fact that people tend to get lost in detail. They start in detail and they have no idea of where they are. All they're seeing are trees. They're not seeing the whole forest. Okay, and so when we design systems, we always work from a broad, what we call mainframe pattern into detail. Okay, and this mainframe pattern informs the arrangement and relationships of the details held in the pattern. Okay, so we never start with details because there's no reference or connecting aspect to integrate the details into a syntropy. And you can see here's an aerial view of a permaculture garden. It's a permaculture vegetable garden, and you can see that it is pattern rich. There's a framing pattern system here, okay? And in that framing pattern system, there are the elements or holons or parts that make up the whole, and this framing pattern system enables everything to integrate properly. So we have this concept of mainframe design, okay? And mainframe design leads to the development of a framework that is structural, okay, like a skeleton that holds and connects the details or elements of a design into synergy, okay? So very much like our body has a skeleton into which the details are placed so that we can function as a whole. And so permaculture is the same. We start with an overriding overall pattern, and when we have that pattern in place, we then add detail. Okay. Because the meaning of the parts of a system is always in relation to the whole system. Okay. And it is the interactions between the parts, the connections between the parts that enable the whole system. And that connectivity is established through pattern. All right. And it's not just something we do in design, it's something we do whenever we approach any task. We always take a big picture view and move into the smaller. We always get the structure together and then we go into the details. And this is a student design from one of our site-based permaculture courses. And you can see there's an overall pattern language here. And that pattern language holds together the detail of the design. So thus, when we design, we follow a journey from the mainframe pattern into detail, okay? And so your mainframe pattern will be very much focused on like major infrastructures, such as your water harvesting, storage and distribution systems, okay? Which will in turn frame your access, your roads and pathways, which will then in turn frame your fencing systems and the layout of your perennial tree-based systems. It will inform where your buildings are placed. And then around that, the development of your garden systems. And so we're actually moving down a scale from broad pattern into more and more and more detail until we get into the nitty-gritty detail of species selection and how those species are arranged in companion planting systems and guilds, okay? And the details of the buildings. First we put the walls up and put the roof on, and then we start putting in the doors and windows and so on we move. Well, that is the way we approach permaculture design, okay? So we never get lost because all parts relate back to the whole. Okay, and this process of moving from pattern to detail never stops, as there's always more elements to add to systems. There's always more refinements as systems become more diversified, complex and stable over time. And so if we get the mainframe pattern right, the whole design can start functioning immediately. And the parts will arrange themselves quite obviously and logically, and they will start to integrate between themselves because the pattern arrangement puts the parts in the right relationship. And we can see that here with our fractal cauliflower, where we can see there's a mainframe pattern that expresses itself all the way down into detail. And that detail is connected to the mainframe. That detail is a localized expression of the whole pattern. All right, and so throughout your life as a permaculture practitioner, you will always be adding more detail into your systems over time, okay? But the point is not to start with the detail. And this brings us to our third principle: apply self-regulation and accept feedback. And the adage has, the sins of the fathers are visited onto the children unto the seventh generation, meaning what we do now has a long-term impact into the future. And so we best make sure that what we do now is going to have a regenerative and positive effect into the future. All right? And so this principle deals with the self-regulatory aspects of permaculture design. Okay, what it's saying is that we need to design systems that are self-regulating. All right, but in order to do that, we've got to understand what the potentials of our growth are and what the limitations of our growth are. Okay, and so we need to recognize that there's a positive and negative feedback in nature, and we need to design systems that are more self-regulating and reduce work and reduce errors and the harsh corrective measures of nature that come as a result of those errors, okay? If we do not heed the feedback we are getting from our systems, from our surrounds, from our socio-economic context, if we do not pay attention to the feedback we're getting, it's very easy for us to step out of order. Okay, and the mainstream system that we see around us, that is the status quo of the planet, doesn't do that. It just expands regardless. It pays no attention to the feedback coming in from nature and coming in from people that says, hey, hang on a minute, maybe we need to slow down here or stop or adjust or change strategy. It just goes like a juggernaut. And if we if we don't stop that practice, then our future as human beings on this planet is under serious threat. And so this principle is saying, hang on a minute, we need to constantly adjust ourselves to what's happening. We need to apply, observe, and interact so that we are aware of context, and we need to then respond appropriately. And so this principle has two aspects. It has the aspect of designing for self-regulation or self-maintenance, which is the holy grail of permaculture. And this is achieved by recognizing the limits of our context and design accordingly so that our designs do not overstep the limits. Okay? And we understand those limits via a feedback loop process. That it's information that's coming back to us as a result of whatever we put out into the world. So how we establish our designs will then give us feedback, and we adjust. And sometimes it's a positive feedback that says, yay, move forward, you're doing well. And at other times it's saying, oh, okay, maybe not such a good idea, or slow down, or consolidate. All right. And so here we have this image of the snake eating its tail in the figure of 8 symbol, which is the symbol of the closed loop cycle. It's the symbol of self-regulation, and the self-regulation is achieved by being realistic about the limitations and potentials of your environment and your social economic context. And we see this in nature. Natural systems have countless checks and balances to ensure that no single species or holon or element dominates and overruns an ecosystem. Okay, and this is generally managed by what we term the predator-prey relationship. Okay, and it's evident in all aspects of nature. We see it in the way that different populations in the natural order control each other, okay, by virtue of predation. All right, and it creates this dynamic balance where everything has the opportunity to thrive, but no single aspect has the opportunity to completely override. And if we look at our human culture, the opposite is true, where we find there's a particular element within society that is just taking over and dominating to the expense of the natural order and to the expense of people as a whole. Okay, we see this tiny percentage of super filthy rich billionaires, royalty, old school banking families who just have absolutely nothing limiting them, and they just consume more power, more wealth. There's never enough. Okay, and they're not bearing in mind that the world that we all live in has limits to growth, and so there's no checks and balances to keep us in a dynamic, harmonic balance within the whole context. We're constantly being told, oh, there's too many people, there's overpopulation. Nonsense. There isn't an overpopulation. There's an over-exploitation of resources, an over-concentration of resources into a tiny minority of people at the expense of everybody else. If there was an equitable distribution of the planet's resources and opportunities, you would see clearly, and as we go further into permaculture, it becomes very obvious that we are nowhere near overpopulated on this planet. We don't have an overpopulation problem. We have a centralization of power and wealth problem. So this principle teaches us to live within our means, okay? Within the human context, the principle guides us to be ecologically frugal, to develop systems that are ecologically appropriate. Okay, it teaches us and guides us to be socially and economically frugal and socially and economically in balance with the potentials and limitations of our context. Okay, and so we design systems that are appropriate responses to those three aspects, and we understand those three aspects through the application of observe and interacting. And so what we start to see now is that all the principles start to cross-reference. They start to integrate. They are actually expressions of one principle. All right. It's like looking into one room through different windows, and each window has a different color, and so filters light in a different way, but it's one room, and the principles are the same. There's actually one principle that expresses itself into different iterations, but it's a holographic concept. Okay, and so as we go along, you will start to see this. And as our designs mature, we need to put less inputs in, okay, because self-regulation starts to kick in, okay, and the design changes the environment, and it changes the environment in a regenerative way, and we start to get a positive feedback. And this positive feedback supports the expansion of the system. It shows us, well, you can expand there, all right, but you need to limit yourself here and contract there. And so there's this dynamic balance of interests that's always going down by virtue of the application of this principle. And so we have a positive and a negative feedback loop constantly going. All right? And the one shows us potential and the other shows us limitation. And it's not only about design, it's also about how we manage. And this principle helps us to stay in tune with the natural, social, and economic patterns and events of the moment. And this principle also directs the design touchstone called design for disaster. Okay, so it's like a design process principle. All right, and here we limit the scope of our systems and design to mitigate disaster events. Okay, and every context, it doesn't matter where you are, there are disaster potentials. Some environments have earthquakes, some have tornadoes, others have floods, others have serious droughts, others have earthquakes, volcanic eruptions. It doesn't matter where you are, natural disasters are part and parcel of life, and we need to design for them because those are the limiting aspects of our designs. Okay, we cannot design systems that use more water than is available in the worst drought possible. Okay, because if we extend our systems beyond that, when we have a 1 in 100 year drought, our systems will not cope. They will collapse. Okay. And so it's very important to apply the observe and interact principle into our reality to understand what the disaster potentials are and how serious can they be. Because if we design for disaster, not only can we mitigate the effects, we can use that disaster opportunity to accumulate. All right, because we know that design is a process of establishing a system that accumulates energy, resources, and information and concentrates it for our use. All right, and it dissipates some energies and some resources intentionally. All right, and so from a disaster perspective, we would be looking to dissipate certain natural forces like powerful winds or the effects of fire, for example, and we would want to accumulate energies during other disasters like drought, for example. We would try and accumulate water. And so if we can design appropriately when these disaster events happen, our systems not only are resilient, but they can actually accumulate resources and accumulate potential while other systems around them collapse. And here you can see in an image somebody has not designed for disaster, and their property is flooding and their infrastructures are being destroyed. Okay, and so good design will turn this into an opportunity. And so it's very important that we observe systems during severe drought, during flood, during wind, during fire, etc. We get out there when it's happening. It doesn't matter when it's happening. It could be 2 o'clock in the morning. We get out and we observe and interact. So we've got data to use in design. All right. And so we can benefit from disaster. So here a swale has been built, and so when it floods, instead of the water just moving randomly across the landscape in a destructive manner, it is patterned on contour, and it is infiltrated into the ground to build a sponge underneath the property to release water slowly but surely for years. And so when drought comes around, the landscape is saturated with water. The effects of that drought are mitigated. Okay. And it's all because of good design and being aware that there are flood potentials, and so infrastructures are put in place to capture that flood water. And so often when disaster strikes, or we can see it coming, we go into what we call contraction mode. Okay. We go into the conservation of core resources. Okay. And so under no circumstances do we, for example, extend the scale of a system beyond the water availability in the worst possible drought, for example. It's valuable information to have. But if we put good infrastructures in place and we have a flood, it means the effects of the next drought will be less, and so our systems can expand. And so positive feedback enables us to scale up. It shows us how to expand the design by virtue of natural, social, and economic feedback that says you're doing it right. There's a demand for your products. Your system is working. There's an abundance of product streams coming off the land now. Okay, you've got more water than you currently need. Your soils are super healthy. There are lots of opportunities now to expand. Where does the market want to go? What are you going to be providing to fulfill that need in the marketplace? Okay. Your systems are showing you new niches of opportunity that are opening up. Okay. And now you can scale up the operation. And you can get into more detail, and you can add more elements. Okay. And you can put more land under production. And so we are constantly looking for indicators. We're looking for indicators of negative events, and we're looking for indicators of positive events. Okay? Because we want to be able to adjust our designs and management strategies so we remain within the realm of self-regulation, and our systems and lives function within their means. And so you can see here are very obvious negative indicators that we need to scale down, that we're in drought, that we can't host as many livestock on the land as here, where you can see it's extremely abundant and we can bring in more livestock. There's more potential for productivity, and there are a lot of different indicators, and the design process will teach you how to look for those indicators and show you what to do. And so this brings us to this concept of the sins of the fathers are visited onto the children and to the 7th generation. And this deals with the self-regulatory aspects of permaculture design that limit or discourage inappropriate growth or behavior. Our objective from an ethical point of view, from a care of the earth point of view, from a care of the people point of view, is to improve the world for the next generation. So when we finally leave and move on, we leave what we had responsibility for in a much more abundant and effective state of affairs than when we received it. Okay, that is regeneration. And so this principle is very empowering, okay, because what it does is it enables us not only to build resilience, okay, but it enables us to dynamically change our circumstance. It empowers us to do something proactive in the face of reality instead of resigning ourselves as victims. It means we have our reality in our hands. So the fourth principle, use and value diversity, is critical to this concept of resilience, okay? And the adage is, don't put all your eggs in one basket, and we know the meaning of this, okay? This principle is about choice and resilience and enabling self-reliance through diversity, having access to a huge range of resources and services on our doorstep. And industrial agriculture, what we see is the opposite. We see most farms functioning with no more than 3 value streams arising from the farm. Permaculture focuses on as many as possible, and you can see it here by virtue of the arrangement of a permaculture production system. Here we have a food forest. It is perennial, so it's productive all the time, and it's extremely diverse, so there's a huge range of product streams coming out of it. Okay, there's choice, there's health, there are many different options inherent in a system like this. And ultimately, diversity enables potential. If we have a diversity of products and services, we will have self-reliance. You can't develop self-reliance in a monoculture. Okay, you can't live off potatoes. So diversity in permaculture systems allows for resilience against ecological and market changes as well. Okay, because there's not always the same demand for the same product streams. Okay, and climate conditions change all the time, so often certain product streams have a bad year, and if your system is built on them, you're going to have a problem. But if you've got diversity, you've always got the option of something else to market, something else to eat, something else to preserve. Okay, and permaculture systems are small and compact. Okay, and based on diversity, and you can find in a 1 hectare permaculture system can have over 1,000 different species and varieties, no problem. That's 1,000 different choices. And you can see it here. Here's a permaculture vegetable garden, and it is just full of opportunity. All right, there's so much to eat here. There's so many medicines. There's a high level of self-reliance inherent in this area alone. So diversity of plant and animal species in a system allows for a wide range of product streams from the site to the people. If one crop fails, there's still many others to yield from. So we're not trying to make money off tons and tons of potatoes or millies or apricots. What we're doing is we are making money and a livelihood off tons and tons of a wide variety of many different things. So whatever elements are in the system, you don't have much of any single one, but collectively you have a huge variety. You have high volumes. The volume is the same, if not more. It's just diversified. And so this diversity provides market resilience. Your site is not dependent on 1 or 2 markets for its income, because as we've seen recently, certain marketplaces can collapse because they're just shut down by the government, for example. Or the demand wanes because fashion changes. And you see this in agriculture. Certain species of crop become unfashionable, and suddenly farmers can no longer sell their crops. You know, during the lockdown, for example, it's an interesting fact that came out of research done. When they closed all the bars and restaurants, the demand for lemons in the country collapsed, because most of South Africa's lemons are sold to bars and restaurants for cocktails. And so lemon farmers all over the country went under. Okay? So with diversity, if one market collapses, there are many others to generate an income from. And this also gives customers a choice, and that's what brings customers in, is choice. That's what makes shopping interesting. Okay, that's what makes visiting your site interesting, is that there's all sorts of interesting things to purchase, which makes your quality of life better. Okay, there's nothing more boring than going to the local supermarket and seeing the same crap day in and day out on the shelves. far more exciting to go into a space and see something new every day, something you've never seen before, something unusual, something that's been very difficult to get, something very healthy that you won't find in the mainstream. So by virtue of diversity. Okay. And so a permaculture will have a huge diversity of economic value streams emanating from it. There are multiple businesses and all of them are small. There you will have businesses based on the sale of plant and animal produce, the sale of soil building products, the sale of processed foods, bio-oils, medicines, fiber, timber. There are services and products that focus into the human realm, such as consulting services, educational programs and courses, the sale of educational materials, the opportunity that your systems give for people to come and live and work on site in exchange for labor or finance. So a properly structured internship can be a really good finance generator for a permaculture system. Okay, and here's a very simple example whereby a farmer, instead of just selling timber once every 15 to 25 years, he's thinned down his timber system and he's added cattle, and so he's got an annual income coming in from cattle. He's got increased fertility in the mineral cycle by virtue of the cattle. He's got management of the understory of his forest system by virtue of the cattle, and then every 10 to 15 years he gets a huge injection of cash. And that is just two simple product streams that changes everything from the reality as it stood in a monoculture. And so this principle of diversity is universally applied. Diversity manifests in every level of permaculture, from diversity of plants, diversity of animals, seed, diversity of soil building processes, diversity of water sources, diversity of building materials, diversity of customers, diversity of economic opportunities built on the diversity of value streams emerging from the system. Okay, and that is the picture of diversity. And this in turn brings us to the next principle: integrate rather than segregate. Okay, many hands make light work, and this is the essence of what enables self-regulation. So in the principle of apply self-regulation and accept feedback, we looked at the concept of, in order to self-regulate, we need to stay in tune with the potentials and limitations of our system. Okay. This principle of integrate rather than segregate shows us exactly how to establish the process of self-regulation. Okay. And so this principle really sits at the heart of permaculture design. Right, and it ensures that we design connections between all the diverse elements of our system, okay? All the different holons or parts that make up the whole. It's all about making connections, connectivity, because connectivity is the essence of syntropy, okay, and is the essence of ecological functioning. And so this principle, in order to achieve this, has two components. It's very important to understand this. And you can see here is an integrated ecosystem that is designed in our favor. It is a cultivated ecosystem. And you can see the pattern language of it is completely different to the system around it. Here we have a syntropy, here we have entropy. There are different patterns in spatial arrangement, all right? And we're going to look at how this is enabled, okay, primarily by applying integrate rather than segregate, because if we do it properly, the system will provide for its own needs and it will reduce our work. The diversity of elements in a system properly connected does the work for us, and thus this principle of many hands make light work. Okay, so the first aspect of this principle is that each element in the system performs many functions. All right, and what we are doing here, we are selecting elements for multifunctionality. So each element should at least have 3 functions for it to be selected into the system. That is what makes it a dynamic element. Okay, and we can see it here by our example of this wood-burning stove. It has 3 functions. It cooks, it heats water, and it warms space. And so what that is efficiency. All right. Because we know, having looked at how ecosystems function very basically in the permaculture context presentation, if we are efficient with resources, we can generate a surplus. And that surplus then enables us to expand the system. It's a positive feedback. And we can bring in more elements. All right. And so we are always looking for plants, animals, technologies, tools that are as multifunctional as possible. And this enables each element to be connected to as many others as possible. Okay? Because what is actually happening is these elements, through connectivity, are providing for each other's needs. And that's the basis of self-regulation. And here we have an example of the chicken. Okay? And we can see that by virtue of the nature and outputs of the chicken, we can use it to support the compost heap. We can use it to build soil fertility through scratching and pooing. We can use it for food for humans and other animals. We can use it for pest control. We can use it for recycling garden waste material. So we can put seeding weeds into the chicken system, and they will eat that and convert it into meat and poo, into fertility. And so we need less chicken feed, all right? And so these particular functions no longer need to be provided for by external inputs. They are provided for internally by virtue of just making good connections between the chicken and the other elements in the system. And we're going to learn how to do this in the design phase of this course, all right? And so every element that we bring into our design needs to be analyzed, okay, for its outputs, okay, for its needs, and for its characteristics. So we know how it functions, and so therefore we can connect it up to needs in the system. We can use it to support other functions in the system, all right? And this connecting up of the needs of one element to the outputs of another enables the process of self-regulation or self-sustenance. All right, and so we can see here the chicken connects to the garden, it connects to the forest, it connects to the greenhouse, it connects to the yard pasture, it connects to the orchard, the pond. And these connections are two-way, okay? For example, the chicken provides fertilizer, pest control, mulch, spreading nitrogen for compost, tillage, and harvesting. And at the same time, the chicken gets food from the garden, all right? The house provides food scraps for the chicken to consume. The chicken provides feathers, methane. It provides food for the house. It can also provide an alarm clock. Right? The more imaginative you are with the reality of your elements, the more effective your self-regulating process will be. And so then the other aspect of this principle of integrate rather than segregate is that each important function is supported by as many elements as possible. All right? So a function is something that the system needs from an operating perspective. So the function of hot water provision, the function of soil fertility, the function of water provision, the function of irrigation, the function of harvesting, the function of pruning, okay? Good design supports those functions with as many elements as possible. Okay, so each function should have at least 3 elements supporting it. Okay, and so here we have the example of hot water generation, and we've got 3 elements supporting it. We've got the solar water heater, and you will always have water as long as the sun shines. But sometimes the sun doesn't shine, especially in winter, and so therefore you can have the donkey boiler using wood. And permaculture systems produce loads of wood, especially stick wood in the form of prunings, all right, to heat water. And you can heat water through compost. Okay, so making large compost heaps and coiling a pipe into it, you can heat water for weeks at a time using compost. There are many different systems. So this is something you would do over winter, when your solar heating is not as efficient, and you don't want to put the effort into making a fire every day. Again, this is where imagination comes in. The more elements support the function, the more resilient those functions will be. Okay, the more dynamic they will be, the more efficient your system will be, the more surplus your system will have, the more positive feedback you will be getting, and the more elements you can bring in, and the more you can scale your system up. All right. And so here we see an example of the function of water provision. There are many different elements doing that. There's harvesting water from the roof. There's borehole water. There's harvesting water from the river. There's pumping that water into a dam for later use. Okay. You can transfer the water directly into an irrigation channel. You're using sewage and grey water treatment for irrigating plants in your system. So instead of just having municipal water, you've got multiple sources of water that not only gives you resilience, it gives you abundance. Okay, and this is the key to abundance. So if one particular element fails, you have a hailstorm, for example, and your solar water heater, the vacuum tubes get damaged, you've still got choices and options for hot water. You will not be without hot water. If the borehole pump does not work, it breaks, there's still rainwater tank, there's still sewage water, there's still river water. These are just examples, okay? So if one element fails, the support of a function can still continue because there are backups. All right, and that's also not only the core of abundance, it's the core of resilience. And so with this principle, what we're actually doing is we are looking at connections. And we're not just looking at connections themselves, we're looking at the quality of these connections. Okay. So it's not just about diversity as we saw in the previous principle, it's about integrating diversity in meaningful ways, whereby all the different elements in the system can connect in as many ways as possible. Okay, and we can see that here in this image. It's a design process that we're going to learn about, whereby we develop as many functional connections as possible between all the elements in the system, so we have high levels of efficiency and self-regulation. The system can produce for its needs and generate a surplus from within itself. Okay. So the more connections that we can establish between elements, the higher the quality of the interconnectivity of our systems will be, and the more options and choices we will have. All right. And that will then support yield, which is the ultimate outcome of all of this. So this integrated relationship between all the elements in our design can reduce inputs. All right. And the input reduction is all about reducing work, reducing time, reducing money, reducing resources needed to maintain and develop systems. Okay. And this allows for less energy to be spent on maintenance and more energy on increasing diversity, interconnectedness, and thus surplus. All right. So in short, the system can produce for its needs from within itself, and it is energy positive. It is syntropic. All right. It's not energy negative. It is a system of multiple interconnected closed loop cycles that just keep the resources and energy going round and round in the system, and at the same time accumulating resources from the outside until there's so much abundance that the surplus has to leave the site, and that can feed an economic well-being. And so, in essence, what we are looking at here is the mechanism of syntropy. Because this process, through the application of this principle of integrate, don't segregate, of value and use diversity, of apply self-regulation and accept feedback, of pattern to detail, of observe and interact, results in higher levels of efficiency, which brings about more opportunity and more niches for life to manifest and thrive in permaculture systems. And this never stops. It's a self-perpetuating process of evolution, and it is the essence of regeneration and regenerativeness, and forms the basis of syntropy. Okay, and so what we're going to do now is look into the next presentation. We're going to look into more concrete and tangible principles that are built on these 5 that we've had a look at now. And it's all going to make a lot more sense, and you're going to start to see how all the principles cross-reference and integrate as one system.